The medical examiner begins the autopsy of a small child, but what she sees when she makes the first cut makes her scream and call the police. It was a morning like so many others in the morgue of San Pedro del Valle. The smell of reheated coffee, mixed with chemicals, was already part of Dr. Talia de la Vega's routine. The gowns hanging behind the door, the cold lights, the sound of footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. Everything was the same until an assistant entered without saying a word, pushing a stretcher covered with a white sheet already stained with yellow spots of dirt and dried blood. Talia signed the form without looking up. Only after hearing the door close behind the assistant did she pull the sheet back carefully, as she always did, and stop. Lying there motionless was the body of a fair-skinned, covered in mud, long eyelashes, dark, unkempt hair. He looked asleep, but he wasn't breathing. She stared for a few seconds longer than usual. The silence in the room became heavier. She swallowed, took the papers from the envelope attached to the stretcher. No identification, just a generic form filled out by the police. Minor, male, found dead on the side of Rural Road 18B. No apparent signs of violence. Possible case of abandonment. She closed her eyes for a moment. No one misses him, she murmured softly, as if asking herself. She made a quick note of the date, the time of admission, and the name that always gave her chills. Unknown. She put on her gloves slowly. The sound of the latex stretching seemed too loud in that cold room. She walked to the sink, washed her hands even though she was already wearing gloves, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were tired. She had slept little again, but what really hurt was something else. A weight on her chest that she already knew. Every body had a story, but this child's was different. There was something there that she still couldn't explain. She returned to the stretcher and removed the sheet completely. The body had marks of dirt, dry leaves stuck to his clothes, a torn t-shirt, shorts that were too big for him and almost fell off, bare feet, dirty nails, and a slight scratch on his knee. She gently touched the child's arm. The skin should have been cold, but it was warm. Maybe they transported him badly, she thought, trying to convince herself. She took the thermometer and confirmed a higher than expected temperature. Nothing made sense, but she continued. She recorded the initial data, size, weight, external conditions, everything methodically, as she had done for more than 20 years. But her fingers trembled a little. Talia took a deep breath. She looked again at the child's face, so calm and so alone. "Who are you, my angel?" she asked softly. Then she began to prepare the room. She turned on the tape recorder, adjusted the lights, and said the silent prayers she always murmured before each procedure. Talia adjusted her apron, tied her hair in a low bun, and put on her mask. She did everything with the same calm rhythm as always. It was almost automatic. Her hands already knew what to do before she even thought. She picked up the tape recorder, and her voice came out firm, as required by protocol. Beginning of procedure. Male patient, approximately 6 years old, admitted at 7:24 a.m. Cause of death undetermined. But before making any incisions, she did what she always did, a complete visual examination. She turned the body on its side and observed the spine, the neck, the thin arms, the legs, the ribs visible under the pale skin. No visible wounds that explained the death. With a gentle touch, she pressed the child's belly. She was talking, perhaps too much. She took the stethoscope, a habit that many there considered useless but that she never abandoned, and placed it on the child's chest, even though she knew she would hear nothing, and she heard nothing, but she felt a strange warmth. She took off her gloves, frowned, and placed her palm directly on the child's chest. The cold metal of the room contrasted with his skin. She paused and placed her other hand on her own face. It was cold, as it should be, but the body was warm. This is not right. She went to the side table, took the clinical thermometer, and placed it under the child's arm. She waited. The screen flickered. "It must be a malfunction," she said quietly. The screen stopped at 33:37 TWRC. It was low for a living human being, but too high for someone who had been dead for so many hours. Talia stood still, feeling a growing unease in her chest, a silent agitation that she tried to control. She wrote down the number, took another, more modern digital thermometer, and repeated the process. The screen lit up, 34.1 degrees C. She took a step away from the stretcher and looked at the body. The child's face was still serene, with long eyelashes and parted lips. But something inside her, something that had nothing to do with science or medicine, began to scream. She took a deep breath and looked around, calmly. Talia. It could have been the transport. Maybe the body was exposed to the sun, but the rural road, where they found the child, didn't get enough sun at that time of day, and she knew it. She sat down in the swivel chair next to the table, took off her glasses, rubbed her eyes, and sat there in silence, trying to find logic. But she couldn't find any, because there wasn't any. She got up again and slowly ran her hand over the boy's still warm arm. Her heart was beating faster. The scalpel trembled in her hand. She approached the table again, her eyes fixed on that small body. She was about to begin the procedure, but something stopped her, as if an invisible force was saying, "Don't do it." She closed her eyes and placed her hand on his chest, as if asking for permission, and then for a second, just a second, she felt a warmth that seemed alive, but it was impossible, completely impossible, or not there in the cold room of the morgue. The silence was absolute, but for Talia, that silence was beginning to scream. Even so, she followed protocol. Midline of the chest, initial incision, she murmured to the recorder, almost as if repeating a text learned by heart without soul. She placed the blade on the thin skin of the child's chest. The tip cut through the first layer carefully, with almost no pressure, all in silence, a heavy silence. And it was at that moment that a faint sound passed, almost imperceptible but real, a sigh. Talia stopped, the scalpel still touching the skin. The sound repeated again, shorter, like a muffled sob. She froze. "No, it can't be," she whispered without moving. Her eyes opened wide. The scalpel slipped from her hand and fell to the floor with a metallic clang that broke the silence of the room like thunder. She took a step back, frightened, and stood there paralyzed. The sound was coming from the body. "This is impossible," she murmured, her heart beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. But then she saw the child's chest move, a tiny movement, an almost invisible rise and fall, but it moved. Talia ran back, put her fingers on his neck, searching for a pulse. She couldn't find it. She put her face over his mouth. For a second, she thought it was her imagination, but it wasn't. It was a breath of warm air. She touched his cheek. "He's alive," she cried. She pressed the emergency button and banged on the door with her hand. "Help! There's a child alive here. He's alive!" She turned her eyes to the child. Red liquid was coming out of where the scalpel had cut. Not much, but enough to make her heart sink. She placed her hand carefully over the cut, trying to stop the bleeding. "Listen to me, my little angel. Hang in there. You're going to be fine. You're going to be fine." Her face was inches from his, her eyes filled with tears, the dirty scalpel on the floor. The white lights in the room seemed even colder in the face of this miracle, or this mistake that could have cost everything. Footsteps could be heard approaching quickly down the hallway. "Bring a stretcher! Call emergency services! He's alive!" When the nurses came running in, she was still there with her hand on his chest, as if protecting something sacred. No one could say anything. Everyone's eyes said the same thing. This shouldn't have happened, but it did. Talia left the room as if she had been shot in the chest, running, pushing doors, screaming for help, something she never did. Her face was red, her hands covered in blood. "Emergency child alive, still breathing," she shouted as she entered the restricted area of the hospital, where the emergency doctors barely understood what was happening. Two nurses came running toward her. She pointed to the stretcher coming behind her, pushed by a frightened assistant. "He was in the mortuary room. I started the cut, and he breathed. He's alive." "What?" asked a nurse, not believing it. "There's no time," Talia shouted, her eyes filled with tears. "Prepare the room. Ventilation monitoring." Now the professionals sprang into action. In seconds, the child was taken to one of the emergency rooms. The machines started to turn on oxygen. Heartbeat saturation. Talia stayed outside, trembling, sweating cold, her hand still pressing the edge of the cut she had made, the child's blood drying on her fingers, guilt weighing on her chest. My God, I was going to cut him. I couldn't stop looking at that stretcher, that small, fragile body being connected to cables, probes, tubes. His eyes were still closed, his breathing very weak, almost gone, but he was alive. "He's very weak," said the doctor on duty. "He's in a deep coma. We don't know how long he's been like this. But he's alive," she asked hoarsely. "Yes, but barely." She closed her eyes and let out a stifled sob, almost falling to her knees right there. The doctor looked at her. "How did they declare him dead?" Talia shook her head, swallowing hard. "I don't know. He arrived without any documents, no medical report, just a police file saying they found him in a field with no signs of life, and no one checked his vital signs before sending him to the morgue." She stared into space, and then at the child, her mouth trembling, her hand resting on the glass of the room. "I was going to open his chest if he hadn't breathed at that second." Silence fell heavily between them. On the other side of the glass, the child's thin body looked even smaller under the sheets and machines. A nurse whispered beside her, "This was a miracle." But another voice, that of a younger resident, murmured, "Or a serious mistake. The kind that costs you your license, you know." Talia didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on the child. Her chest tightened as if reliving all the pain, the fear, the sound of the sigh, the scream, the guilt, but also the hope. Because he was still there, still fighting, still alive, and she wasn't going to let him go. Not now. Not anymore. Talia was outside the room, looking through the glass window. Inside, everything in her was still trembling. The scene wouldn't leave her head. The sigh, the falling scalpel, the scream. The child was alive, and now fighting, connected to cables, machines, and care that seemed bigger than him. 2 nurses worked around the stretcher, putting in an IV, adjusting the oxygen mask, checking the monitors. The doctor ordered tests, tests, tests. Everything was moving fast, but for Talia, time seemed to stand still. She closed her eyes tightly, trying to stay calm, and it was then that she noticed something was stuck to the side of the child's shorts, right at the waist, hidden under the fold of the dirty fabric. She approached the stretcher carefully and lifted the fabric. It was a thin necklace made of dark thread, almost confused with the dirt. In the center was a slightly crushed silver ball covered in marks. Talia grabbed it delicately, trying not to disturb the child's injured body. The ball was hollow, as if it could be opened, but it had no clasp on the outside. There was only one thing written in very small letters, almost erased by time. She read it aloud in a low voice. Carlito. The word hung in the air. She ran her finger over the letters as if she wanted to feel the name. There was no surname, no date, nothing else. Just that, Carlito. Talia stared at the necklace for several seconds. The name sounded like an ancient whisper, like an echo coming from a distant place. The nurse next to her asked, "Did you find any identification?" Talia just showed her the necklace without saying anything, and looked back at the boy. Carlito. One name, just one name, and yet it was more than they had until now. She imagined someone putting that necklace on him. A mother, perhaps. Someone who still called him that. Someone who might be looking for him, crying desperately. Or maybe no one was waiting for him. Talia squeezed the small silver ball tightly. It was light, but it carried a weight she couldn't explain. She whispered again, just to herself, "You have a name, little one. You have a name." And in that moment, amid the confusion of the machines and the contained anguish, that name became a small but living flame. Because where there is a name, there is a story, and she was going to find it, even if no one else cared. Talia spent the night in the hospital. She couldn't leave, even though the doctors said Carlito was stable, even though her shift was over, even though all the hallways were silent. She remained seated in one of the chairs in the medical area, with a cold coffee in her hand, her eyes fixed on her notes. She reviewed and reviewed the documents that arrived with the child, looking for anything, any detail that would help her understand who he was, where he came from, why he was alone. She opened the brown paper folder that arrived with the body, delivered by the police. Inside were a few sheets of paper, a brief handwritten note in hurried writing. Male minor, approximately 6 years old, found unconscious with no apparent vital signs. Sent to the morgue due to lack of response to resuscitation. Case, open field, Highway 18B, no houses nearby. Talia frowned. Open field, she read aloud, turning the page and looking for coordinates, a reference point, the name of the ranch, anything, but there was nothing. She got up from her chair and went to the administration room. She asked for the body's entry records. The night guard, a soft-spoken man, leafed through the control books. It was delivered here at around 7 in the morning by Patrol 021. And who signed for it? She asked tensely. There is only one official name, Ramirez. She wrote it down on a piece of paper, thanked him, returned to her chair in the hallway, sat down, and looked at the police report again. What bothered her most was not how little there was, but what was missing. There was no detailed report of the scene, no photographs, no information about whether there were any objects near the body, no witnesses, not even the time the child was found. She shook her head slowly. "This isn't right," she muttered, shuffling the papers again. She picked up the hospital phone and dialed the number of the local police station. She waited. San Pedro Police Station. Good evening. Good evening. This is Dr. Talia de la Vega from the morgue. I need to talk to someone about the case of the child found on Highway 18B on the other end. Silence for a moment. About the body from this morning? Yes, but he's not dead. He's alive, and there's something strange in the paperwork. One moment. The line went silent for several seconds. When the voice returned, it was another officer. "Doctor, this is Sergeant Alvarez. He's saying the child is alive. Yes, and more than that. The file I received is incomplete. There's no exact location, no description of the scene, nothing useful to identify the child. Strange. Ramirez should have recorded everything in the system. Maybe he didn't have time. He had time to take the body to the hospital, but not to fill out a form." Silence on the other end of the line. "Look, doctor, I'll check here, but you're better off not worrying about it. We're already on it." Talia narrowed her eyes. "I'm not worried. I'm in charge. This child could have died due to negligence, and I want to know why basic information is missing in such a serious case." The call ended just like that. Talia stared at the phone. The silence now hurt more than any answer. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a gap in a file and perhaps in an entire system, and deep down she knew it. Where information is missing, secrets are hidden. It was almost 3 in the morning. The hospital slept in silence. The lights were dim, the hallways almost empty. The constant noise of the machines in the intensive care unit was the only thing that reminded her that a battle against death was being fought there. Talia couldn't sleep. She sat in a vinyl chair near the door of the room where Carlito was hospitalized, holding his necklace in her hands. The silver ball spun slowly between her fingers. Her eyes were heavy, but her mind was too full to stop. That's when she heard soft footsteps. They weren't the footsteps of hospital shoes, but rather barefoot footsteps, or those of very worn sandals. They came from the end of the hallway. She got up slowly, her eyes now alert, and saw a woman standing almost pressed against the wall, right at the glass partition of the intensive care unit. She was thin and hunched over, her hair disheveled pressed against her sweaty forehead. Her clothes were dirty and stained. The hem of her skirt was torn and dragged on the floor, and she wore an old loose blouse stained with mud. Her red eyes stared intently into the room at Carlito. Talia stood motionless, watching silently. The woman did not move, she just cried silently, her tears falling slowly, as if she no longer had the strength to sob. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Her eyes were swollen, and her face seemed trapped between fear and love. Talia approached slowly and quietly. "Sir," she said softly and carefully, "do you know him?" The woman turned around, frightened, her gaze gone, her body trembling. Before Talia could take another step, the woman ran away. "Wait!" Talia shouted, already running after her. But the woman was fast, despite looking tired. She turned in the hallway and disappeared through the emergency exit at the back of the hospital. Talia ran there but saw nothing. Only the half-open gate, the cold early morning wind, and silence once again. She stood there for a few seconds trying to understand. Her heart was beating very fast. Her breathing was short. She slowly returned to the intensive care unit and stood in front of the glass. Carlitos was still the same, small, quiet, and fragile. But now she was sure that woman had not appeared by chance. The pain in her eyes was a mother's pain, and even though no words were spoken, Talia felt it. That woman knew Carlito, and Carlito was not as alone as he seemed. The next morning dawned cold, with a dry wind that cut into her face. Talia did not sleep. She tossed and turned in bed, the image of the unknown woman returning to her mind over and over again. The way she looked at Carlito, her silent crying, her escape. She felt a distress in her chest that would not go away. She could no longer just wait for answers. She needed to do something, and if no one was going to look for the child, she would do it, even if she had to go alone. Before the sun came up, she was already driving. The road was long with few signs. The dirt road made the car shake. Every stone on the ground seemed to say, "Go back. This is not for you." But she continued anyway. She carried Carlito's necklace in her robe pocket as if it were a compass. The police report said they had found the boy on Highway 18B near a field, but it didn't say exactly where. She stopped the car several times, got out, and looked around. Everything looked the same: tall grass, fallen fences, silence. After almost 2 hours of searching, she saw a dirt driveway almost hidden among some bushes. The gate was open. Nothing showed that the place was in use. Talia entered slowly, the car crunching on the gravel. Inside, there was absolute silence. She parked and got out calmly, her eyes scanning the field. She had a strange feeling, as if her own footsteps were making too much noise. She walked through the grass, mud sticking to her shoes. She passed a nearly collapsed shed and saw pieces of toys scattered on the ground. A wheelbarrow without wheels, a deflated ball, a headless teddy bear. Her heart sank. She continued walking to a more secluded part of the land, where the bushes grew wild, and that's where she stopped. She knelt slowly on the ground, half hidden among dry leaves. There was a piece of light blue children's fabric with star patterns, dirty with dirt and dried blood. She picked it up carefully. It was from a small shirt, perhaps belonged to Carlito or another child. She felt a lump in her throat. She looked around, and that's when she saw them. Small, messy footprints, as if someone had run through there barefoot. They were short, light steps of a child. Talia followed the path of the footprints with her eyes. They disappeared to one side, very close to an area with denser vegetation, as if they had fled from something or someone. She stood there without moving. The wind moved the leaves. The sky was cloudy, and the air felt heavier. She pressed the piece of cloth against her chest, her eyes filling with tears. It was no longer just a case. It was a silent cry for help lying on that ground. And now she knew it. Carlito wasn't there by accident. Something or someone had left him in that field, and perhaps he wasn't the only one. The silence of the place wasn't empty. It was full of pain, and Talia felt that from that moment on, she could no longer back down. Talia continued slowly, her heart tight, her hands sweaty, the piece of cloth still tucked in her robe pocket. There, in the middle of nowhere, was an old house, yellowed by time, its windows without glass, its door hanging on one side, its fence completely fallen down. There seemed to have been no life there for a long time. But even so, something about that image turned her stomach. She took a deep breath, slowly, the floor creaking under her feet. A strong smell of mold, wet earth, and something she couldn't explain came through the cracks. She pushed the door carefully. The wood creaked too loudly for the silence around it. Inside, darkness filled everything. The sun streamed in through the holy walls, drawing dust in the air. Everything seemed to have been abandoned for years, but the details told another story. In the living room, a dirty mattress on the floor, a child's blanket with faded pictures, plastic plates thrown in a corner, and toys. Lots of toys. Toy cars with broken wheels, a torn coloring book, a child's drawing taped to the wall, just crooked lines and a red heart in the middle. Talia crouched down on the floor. Under a small wooden table, there was a doll, a plastic superhero with a missing arm. She picked it up carefully and saw that around the doll's neck, tied with a thin string, was another necklace exactly like the one Carlito wore, a small silver ball. She felt the air leave her for a second. her heart beating fast, her hands clutching the doll carefully, as if it were made of glass. She sat on the floor, exhausted, her eyes fixed on that object. "My God," she whispered. "He lived here." She looked around at the filth, the abandonment, the silence. But now everything had a different color. That house had been a home, weak, dangerous, sad, but a home. Carlito had slept there, played there, cried there. She ran her hand over the floor, feeling every splinter, every speck of dust, as if she wanted to understand everything at once. The doll with the necklace seemed to be saying something, telling a silent story stored in that emptiness and the loneliness of the house. It echoed deeply. It echoed in her, because for the first time, Tia Aaliyah realized that Carlito came from somewhere. He had a corner, even if it was just a corner. He had toys, even if they were broken. He had someone or something before he was just a body on a stretcher. And in that moment, sitting there in the middle of the dust and silence, she made a silent promise she was going to find out everything it hurt. But she was going to see it through to the end, because no one else seemed willing to see what she was seeing, that behind that little body, there was a whole life, and she wasn't going to let that life disappear. Like that, the silence of the abandoned house seemed to have a different weight now. Talia walked slowly through the rooms, each step a chill. The walls were peeling, the floor covered in dust, and there was the smell of a place that had seen too much pain, but there was something that wouldn't let her leave. It was as if the space itself was whispering to her to continue, to search for more. She entered a small room with no windows and a low ceiling. Inside, there was an old, half-broken chest of drawers with a drawer missing. The mattress on the floor still bore the imprint of a small body, as if someone had slept there and never left. It was then that she noticed something strange. A part of the wall in the right-hand corner looked different. The plaster was newer and poorly applied. There were finger marks, as if someone had tried to hide something in a hurry. She approached, ran her hand and knocked with her knuckles. It sounded hollow. She crouched down and slowly pulled a loose piece of wood from the baseboard. There, between the wall and the remains of brick, was a hole, and inside it was a small, crumpled blue notebook with a rocket sticker on the front, now half faded. Talia took it as if she were holding something sacred. She opened it slowly, and the world stopped. Inside were children's drawings, colorful, crooked, full of strong lines. A sun, a house, two stick figures, one big with long hair and one small with big eyes. Next to them, words written in a child's handwriting. "I don't want them to hit me anymore." She felt the air leaving her. She turned the page. "My mom cries every night." Her hand trembled. Tears began to fall without her realizing it. She turned another page. "I want my mom to smile again." It was like hearing Carlito's voice of Carlito, as if each line carried a cry for help, an outburst, a silent scream that no one heard. She sat on the floor and pressed the little notebook to her chest. My God, they both lived here and were trapped. Pain filled her chest. It was no longer an investigation. It was the story of a real child, a real mother who cried every night. The next day, Talia took the little notebook to the police station. The same sergeant from before received her. "I found this in the house near where they found the child," she said, handing it over firmly. He glanced at it, looked at her, frowned, and said, "Why is the doctor doing this? It's not your area." She stared at him, because no one else was doing anything, and that child was still breathing. He closed the notebook forcefully. "You should take care of the hospital, not police cases. And if you go there and someone gets hurt, someone has to take care of it. And if it's just me, then it will be me." The sergeant looked at her seriously. "Be careful, doctor. Don't get too involved." But Talia already knew. She was already too involved, and she wasn't going to stop. She wasn't going to stop. It was late afternoon at the hospital. The orange light of the sun streamed through the corridors, leaving everything with a strange, almost sad calm. Talia walked toward the ICU as she did every day, with a folder of test results in one hand and Carlito's necklace in the other. That's when she saw the woman, the same one with red eyes, dirty clothes, and a weak gait. But this time she didn't run away. She was standing in front of the glass door of the room where Carlito was still fighting for his life, her eyes fixed on him, her hands trembling, her body hunched over, as if she were cold or afraid of the world. Talia approached slowly, her voice coming out low like a whisper. "It's you, isn't it?" The woman didn't answer. Talia took another step, standing beside her. "You're his mother." The woman closed her eyes, tears slowly rolling down her dust-stained face. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She swallowed hard. "They forced me to keep quiet." Talia looked at her affectionately, without rushing. "What's your name?" It took a moment. Then she looked her in the eyes for the first time. "Maria Rita." The silence between the two felt heavy. "Carlito is my son," and her voice came out like a painful confession. "I thought he was dead." Her legs faltered a little. Talia held her by the arms, helping her to sit down on one of the chairs in the hallway. Maria Rita was trembling. She couldn't stop looking through the glass. "Tell me what happened," Talia asked gently. "I'm here. I'm listening." And then she spoke. Her voice was low. She spoke slowly, pausing after each sentence. Each sentence seemed to hurt her. "We lived in that house in hiding. It wasn't ours. It belonged to him, a bad man, a drug dealer in the area. I ended up there after fleeing from another place with nowhere else to go. He said he would take care of us, but it was a lie. His eyes were lost. They knocked on the door in the early morning. Cars arrived, drugs, weapons. I had to keep quiet. If I screamed," she ran her hands over her arms as if she could feel it all over again. "He hit me, insulted me, did horrible things." Talia fell silent, just listening. "He was all I had. He slept close to me. He said he was going to be a hero, but he saw more ugly things than a child should see." He sighed deeply. "One day I tried to run away. I waited for him to leave. I took Carlito in my arms, but he came back early. He grabbed me and threw me to the ground. Carlito ran and hid among the trees, and I couldn't go after him. I covered my face with my hands. I spent days without knowing where he was. I thought he had died. I was trapped, wounded. I hid. I waited until it got dark and walked. I walked until I reached the hospital." She looked at Carlito again on the other side of the glass. "When I saw him there, so still I couldn't speak. I froze. Talia took his hand, but now you've spoken, and he's here. He's alive because you didn't give up." Maria Rita collapsed and cried with her whole body. Talia hugged her, as if she were holding a part of her own past, because in that cold hallway, between tears and whispered secrets, two wounded women recognized each other, and for a moment, neither of them was alone. Still sitting in the cold hospital hallway, Maria Rita dried her eyes with her thin hands, trembling more from exhaustion than from cold. Talia remained by her side in silence, holding her hand tightly. There was no rush, just listen, really listen. Maria Rita then looked down and took a small folded item out of the inside pocket of her blouse, wrapped in old plastic, stained by time. She unfolded it carefully. "I've kept this since the day he was born." It was a hospital bracelet, the kind they put on newborns in the crib. The plastic was dry, the writing almost erased, but still legible. Carlito Mendoza R. Talia took it delicately and read it over and over again. The name matched. Carlito, her last name, Rita, was proof of her motherhood written there. But there was something else just below the name. The hospital of origin, Santa Cruz de los Andes. She frowned. "That hospital isn't here." Maria Rita nodded slowly. "It's in another state, very far away, almost on the border." Talia looked at her in surprise. "You came from there?" Maria Rita took a deep breath. Her eyes became distant again. "We did," she swallowed, and continued in a low voice. "After Carlito was born, I tried to start over, but his father never let me. He threatened me, followed me, yelled at the door. I didn't want my son to grow up in the middle of all that. So one day I gathered what little I had, took Carlito in my arms, and left. I didn't know where to go. I just knew I had to get out of there." Talia looked again at the bracelet. That little strip of plastic said more than any police report. It showed an origin, a story, a whole piece of a life that no one there knew about. "Why did you come here?" she asked in the most human tone she could muster. Maria Rita lowered her head. "Because I heard that no one asked many questions here, because you could hide." I thought I would be able to start over, but I ran into the wrong man again. Silence fell heavily once more. The bracelet glinted faintly in the hallway light. Talia returned it carefully, and there, in that small, worn plastic object, was all the pain of a mother, the love for a child, the desperate attempt to escape a past that would not let her go. And now she knew. Carlito was not just a child found on the side of the road. He was a child with a long history, marked by the silent courage of a woman who, though broken, remained standing, though afraid, though dirty, though wounded, still there, fighting for him. Night fell heavily on the hospital. The dark sky seemed to carry the same weight that Talia felt in her chest. She had spent the whole day among papers, tests, tense conversations, but now, alone in the small room of the doctor's quarters, everything was falling apart again. She lay down on the narrow stretcher, covered herself up to her chin, closed her eyes. But sleep did not come as peace. It came as memory. It came as pain. The dream began with laughter, a little girl's laughter, a soft, sweet sound that filled the air with a forgotten joy. She was a little girl running in the yard, her hair tied in 2 messy pigtails, pink sandals, a dress full of little flowers. "Mommy, look, here I am!" she shouted, laughing. Talia ran behind her, laughing too. The image was so vivid, so real, that it hurt. But the scene changed quickly. The laughter turned to silence. The sun turned to rain. The house turned to a highway. The rain pounded hard on the car window. Talia was driving. The little girl was sleeping in the back seat, hugging a teddy bear. A truck appeared out of nowhere, braked, skidded, and then the crash, the sound of metal bending, the scream, the smell of gasoline, the pain, the despair. Talia trying to get out of the car, trying to reach the back seat. The smoke, the siren, my daughter screaming, "She's in there!" Her hands pounding on the hot metal, the fire starting, tears mixed with rain, and no one managed to get her out in time. In the dream, Talia fell to her knees on the wet asphalt, her eyes lifeless. The teddy bear burned among the wreckage. She woke up with a start, her body sweaty, her chest tight, breathing fast. She sat up in bed, gasping, ran her hands over her face, tears flowing without warning, as they always did. 8 years had passed. 8 years since she lost her daughter. 8 years since she stopped smiling, since she stopped really living. She never told anyone at the hospital. It was a pain she kept in a place where no one could enter. She continued working, studying, keeping quiet. She made medicine a wall so she wouldn't feel, and she specialized in the dead because at least the dead couldn't leave again. But now it was that boy, Carlito, so small, so quiet, so much like him. He had done something to her, touched a place she thought was buried. She got out of bed and went to the window. The hospital was asleep, but she was awake inside. She rested her forehead on the cold glass. "You're not going to die, my little one," she whispered. "I'm not going to lose you, too." And for the first time in 8 years, she felt like a mother again. Not because she was replacing someone, but because she cared, because she fought, because she loved, even though she didn't realize it, even though she was afraid. Carlito had brought back what she thought was gone forever, the ability to feel. The sun was just rising, but she had already made up her mind. Her eyes were red from crying so much, her voice broken by so many truths stuck in her throat. Carlito's notebook was in her hands, and with it the weight of everything she knew and could no longer keep quiet. She entered the local newspaper office as if she didn't need to ask permission. "I need to talk to someone. It's urgent." The reporter who came to attend to her recognized the name instantly. "You're the doctor from the case of the child on the highway." She just nodded, too tired to repeat everything. "I have something to show you," she said, taking the notebook out of her bag pocket. She handed it to him carefully. The reporter opened it and looked through it. Her silence grew heavier with each page. This was written by him, Carlito, the boy who almost died in the morgue. He lived through it with his mother, threatened, with no one around, no one to help. The house is abandoned, but everything is still there. I saw it with my own eyes, and the police. Silence. And when I speak, they tell me to leave. She took a deep breath, holding back the tears. But I can't leave now. Not anymore. The journalist pressed his lips together and looked at her. Doctor, if you're sure about what you're saying, we'll publish it. Talia felt that she wasn't just sure. She had names, addresses, and now she had a mission. They scheduled the interview for the next day. A special front-page story, a serious accusation. The notebook would be scanned, protected, analyzed, and shown to the world. But that same night, her home phone rang. It was around 10:15 p.m. She was sitting on the couch looking out the window when she heard the sharp sound of the landline ringing. She answered, "Hello?" On the other end, a low, cold, unhurried male voice said, "You've meddled where you shouldn't, doctor." Silence. She froze. The voice continued in the same calm tone. People who meddle in things that don't concern them usually end up alone. Talia tried to respond, but her throat closed up. Her hand clenched the phone with force. Delete the note and take care of your life while you still have it. The call ended. She stood there, the phone hanging in her hand, her chest rising and falling slowly, her hands sweating, the fear returning, that fear she knew so well, the fear of losing again. But now there was something different. She looked up and saw the picture frame with the photo of the daughter she had lost, and whispered to herself, "I'm not going to stop," because even though she was afraid, she knew that keeping quiet hurt more, and Carlito could no longer be silenced. It was late afternoon when Talia stopped by the infirmary, as she always did, to bring Maria Rita some tea, but the room was empty. The bed was made, the blankets folded, no sign of her. Talia looked around, confused. "Nurse," she called, "where is the patient in room 212, Maria Rita?" The girl glanced at the folder, confused. She's not here. She was discharged." Of course she wasn't under protection. She couldn't leave. Talia went to the reception desk. No one knew anything. No one saw her leave. No discharge record. No visitors noted. She ran up to the ICU with her heart racing. She stood in front of Carlito's stretcher. He was still there, intubated, fighting, but only his mother had disappeared. She returned to the hallway, unable to think straight. Someone saw Maria Rita leave the hospital, an elderly nurse who was cleaning the floor. He looked up and replied quietly, "They took her away." Talia froze. "What do you mean they took her away?" "I saw two men near the service exit. They weren't wearing uniforms. One was holding her by the arm, and no one did anything." The man looked down in shame. "I thought they were, I don't know, police." Everything looked very strange. She ran to security and asked to see the cameras. They told her that only with authorization from management. "Then call management right now," she shouted, now separate. Half an hour later, she was in the monitoring room with her eyes glued to the computer screen. Her fingers gripped the arm of the chair so tightly that they turned white. "Go back to yesterday, 6:34 p.m., side hallway," she asked the technician, and there it was. The video showed Maria Rita walking slowly out of an emergency door with her head down. Two men were beside her, dressed in normal clothes without badges. One put his hand firmly on her shoulder. The other looked around. A third man appeared further back, holding the door open. She hesitated, looked back, as if she wanted to say something, but they pulled her away and the door closed. Talia put her hands to her face, took a deep breath, and felt the world spinning. "You're seeing this, right?" she said, almost breathless. "This is a kidnapping." The technician nodded, but no one said anything. Talia ran out of the room and went straight to the police station. She showed them the video, brought the evidence, and demanded an answer, but there was silence. "We have no record of any operation," said the officer. "Then who are those men?" she shouted, showing the video on her cell phone. "And why did the woman disappear right after reporting a criminal?" "We'll check." "Check what?" "The woman who disappeared is the mother of a child in a coma." The policeman was silent, then looked at her intently. "Doctor, you're exposing yourself too much." Talia understood the message. It was clear they weren't going to do anything. She returned to the hospital with tears in her eyes. She went to the room where Carlito was sleeping, rested her forehead on the glass, and stood there in silence. "I promise I'll bring your mom back," she whispered. And in that moment, more than a doctor, more than a woman, Talia became the guardian of a story they wanted to erase, but she wasn't going to allow it, because now it was just for Carlito. It was for all the mothers who were never heard. It was dawn. The hospital slept in heavy silence. The dim lights of the ICU cast shadows on the walls, and the only sound was that of the monitors beating in a steady rhythm until one began to beep, first briefly, then insistently. The heart graph moved strangely. The saturation dropped. The oxygen fell suddenly. Talia was in the hallway, sitting on a bench with a cup of cold coffee in her hands, her eyes lost, her soul tired. But when she heard the alarm, she knew. She jumped up, ran into the room, pushing the door open with force. Carlito was lying there, small, his little arms open, his mouth half open, trying to breathe. His chest rose and fell strangely, very quickly, as if something inside him was already giving up. "No, no, no," she whispered, approaching the stretcher. The nurses were already there, one putting on the ambu bag, another adjusting the medications. The doctor on call was called immediately, but Talia didn't wait for anyone. She threw the folder on the floor and grabbed his hand. "Carlito, my boy, listen to me." Her voice broke. I'm here. He didn't respond, his little body trembling, his heartbeat rising, then falling, the graph moving like crazy. It was as if his body was screaming while his soul thought about leaving. "Fight. Please fight," she said, tears falling uncontrollably. She knelt next to the bed and rested her forehead on her hand. His breathing was strong and uneven, as if he were trying to pull in the air that he couldn't. "You're not going to leave. Do you hear me? Not like this. Not now. You're strong now. You've already come out of the mountain of pain and fear. Now fight for me." The machines beeped all around her. Everything was moving fast, but there, in that small space between her fingers and his, time stood still. "Please, my angel," she whispered. "You gave me back my life. Now let me help you stay." She closed her eyes, tears falling directly onto the sheet. The world seemed to disappear. Only the two of them remained there, a broken woman and a child fighting to continue existing. The crisis lasted minutes, but for Talia, it felt like years. When the monitor stabilized, when the line stopped moving like crazy, she couldn't get up. She stayed there with her forehead pressed against his hand, sobbing quietly, without a word, without a sound, just her, Carlito, and the purest love born of the fear of losing him. Talia didn't sleep that night. Even though Carlitos was stable and the monitors were calm, she felt that something inside her was still screaming, an intuition, a detail she couldn't ignore. Early in the morning, she returned to that house, the same house where she had found the dirty toys, the doll with the necklace, the pain stuck to the walls. This time she went straight to the room. Everything was as she had left it, except the doll was on the floor, as if someone had touched it. She picked it up. It was the same superhero with the broken arm and the little necklace tied around its plastic neck. But there was something strange. She shook the doll carefully. Something inside made a dry sound. She turned it on its side and pressed it. The sound was clear, hidden paper. Without thinking, she tore the seam that was already loose, stuck her fingers in, and pulled something out. It was a piece of paper, folded many times, dirty, almost falling apart. She opened it slowly, with all the care in the world. Her hands were shaking. It was a sheet from a school notebook. Inside were names, addresses, dates, many dates, codes, letters, and a title written in red pen with crooked letters. "They are also afraid." Talia sat on the floor, her breath failing her. This wasn't just about Carlito. It wasn't just about Maria Rita. It was bigger, much bigger. She took photos, made copies, and ran to the newspaper. She showed them everything. The story came out that same afternoon, headline on the front page. The story of the child found alive in the morgue of his missing mother, with names hidden in a child's doll. The reaction was immediate. Hours later, the hospital was surrounded by patrol cars. The prosecutor's office took action. Arrest warrants were issued. Places that were on the paper were searched. People were detained. And finally, they found Maria Rita. She was injured, weak, scared, hidden in an old warehouse with marks on her face, on her arms. on her soul, but alive. Talia ran to see her. When Maria saw her come in, she could hardly speak. She cried. Talia bent down, held her face with both hands, and said in a low voice, "I promised I would bring you back, and here we are, at the hospital." Carlito was also beginning to react. His eyes were still closed, but his hands were already moving. His breathing was better, his heartbeat stronger, his body fighting. Talia entered the room and held his hand as she always did, but this time she felt a soft squeeze in return, a minimal movement, but enough to make the tears start to fall. She leaned over and pressed her face against his on the pillow. "You did it, my love. You did it." And in that moment, without cameras, without news, without witnesses, the three lives breathed together again in pain, in courage, and in love that never gives up. Morning came slowly that day. The sun entered through the windows of the ICU with a different softness. Everything seemed calmer. The hospital corridors were silent, as if time had learned to wait. Talia was sitting next to the bed with her hand on Carlito's. She didn't say anything. She was just there in silence, like every morning, her eyes tired but full of care, her head bowed, her soul connected to him. She no longer knew if it was the 20th or 30th day she had been there with him, but she no longer counted. It was the time her heart demanded. She glanced the monitor. His signs were stable. His little face was still pale, but his chest rose and fell with a little more strength. Suddenly, something changed. At first, it was almost imperceptible, a small movement of his eyelid, then a faint but real sigh. Talia leaned over Carlito, and then, as if the whole world had stopped for a second, his eyes opened slowly, confused, blinking. She held her breath. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. His dark eyes were there, alive, calm, searching for something, and they found hers. For a moment there was no sound, no words, just the gaze of a child who had returned from the impossible, and a woman who no longer knew if she could feel again. But she did. She felt everything. A warm wave filled her chest. Tears fell slowly. She smiled a small smile, full of pain, full of love. "Hello, my child," she said softly, her voice breaking. "You're back." Carlitos continued to look at her. He wasn't afraid, no expression of fear, only calm, and a sparkle that Talia hadn't seen in anyone for a long time. He blinked slowly, as if he understood everything. She stroked his hair gently. "You're strong. You're so strong." The boy didn't speak, but with that look he said it all. And there, in that silence, in that moment without noise, two broken hearts recognized each other. They didn't need to explain themselves. They didn't need to say where they came from or what they had lost, because in that second, they both knew something inside them had come back to life. And for the first time in many years, Talia felt something she no longer felt: hope. In the intensive care room, everything stopped for a moment. Talia was still sitting there, her eyes fixed on Carlitos. The boy blinked slowly, trying to understand the world again. She held his hand as if holding a miracle until she heard soft, almost weightless footsteps in the hallway. The door opened slowly. It was Maria Rita, weak, with a bandage on her face and her shoulders slumped, but firm, her eyes full of tears, her heart beating fast in her chest. She took 2 steps inside with her hands crossed over her chest, trembling all over. She said nothing, just looked, and then Carlito turned his head and looked at her. His eyes opened slowly, his mouth too. He brought his hand to his belly as if something very strong had awakened inside him, and said, "Mama." His voice came out low and drawn out but alive. Maria Rita covered her mouth with her hand and fell to her knees right there next to the bed. She put her face on her son's chest and cried uncontrollably from deep inside, like someone who has been holding back for a long time and can no longer hold back. Carlito also was crying. Talia moved aside a little, her eyes filled with tears, respecting this moment that was not hers. The two hugged each other tightly, as if one's body could heal the absence of the other, as if that hug could put all the broken pieces back together. A hug where the pain did not disappear, but love began to heal. Carlito caressed his mother's face gently, as if he couldn't believe it was real. Maria couldn't stop kissing his forehead. "Forgive me," she said between sobs. My child, forgive me." He just hugged her tighter. Talia turned her face away, trying not to cry, but it was too late. The tears flowed uncontrollably because there was nothing purer there, nothing stronger, nothing more real. Later, with the lights dimmed and the room silent, Maria Rita called Talia aside. "Doctor," she said, turning around and discreetly wiping her tears. "Tell me," Talia breathed. She looked at Carlitos, fast asleep. "I know I can't promise you anything. I don't know what will happen to me. I don't know how far I can go." Talia sat down slowly beside her. "But he has you, and now he's safe." Maria Rita shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. "I need to ask you something difficult, but from the bottom of my heart." Talia remained silent. Maria Rita grabbed her hands tightly. "If one day I can no longer be with him, if something happens to me, please take care of him, as if he were your own." Talia froze. She didn't respond right away. Silence filled the room. She looked at Carlito, that child who had arrived as a nameless body, and now slept with his chest rising and falling, as if he were dreaming. She looked back at Maria. She swallowed. "I don't know if I can be a mother again." Maria Rita smiled tenderly. "But you already are. He already feels it." Talia looked ahead with blurred eyes, and in that instant, there was no longer any doubt in her heart. She was already a mother, not by choice, but by love. Time passed at a different pace after that. The wounds did not disappear, but they began to heal with a kind of care that cannot be learned from books. Carlitos left the hospital weeks later. He walked slowly, still with some difficulty, but his eyes were full of life. With the help of the justice system, Maria Rita received support. The prosecutor's office, pressured by everything that had come to light, requested protective measures. They moved to a small, quiet town with a simple house and a public school with trees in the courtyard. It was a new beginning from scratch, but a beginning nonetheless. Talia did not disappear. She called, sent letters, sent toys, books with colorful drawings, and clothes that she herself chose with the care of a mother who did not want to fail with the gift. She visited when she could, without much warning. She would just arrive, knock on the door, and said with a shy smile, "I came to see my boy." Maria Rita opened the door with that look of gratitude that cannot be expressed in words. Carlito ran towards Talia with his little arms open, even though he was still slow at running, and there they hugged each other like people who choose each other, without a blood tie, but with something much greater. Talia brought flowers for the kitchen, helped arrange the books on the small shelf, baked a cake with Carlito, and laughed when he made mistakes on purpose, just to stain her apron. The afternoons were simple, but full of meaning. Then, months later, on a random morning, Talia came home and found an envelope in the mailbox. It was from Maria Rita. She opened it right there, standing up, without thinking. Inside was a single photo of Carlito in his school uniform at the school gate, his hair combed, a shy smile on his face, and a small, colorful cardboard sign in his hands made with crayons, written in a child's crooked, colorful letters. "My mommy from the heart, Dotra Talia." She sat down on the stairs at the door of her house, holding the photo tightly, her eyes filled with tears, and her chest feeling a wound that was opening and healing at the same time. She cried there in silence, with no one around. She cried for everything she had lived through, for everything she had lost, for everything she had gained, because that little photo on that little sign, made with little hands, was proof that love always finds a way, even when all seems lost. And that day, Talia understood that her daughter who had left a space for another child to enter, and Carlito had gained two mothers, one by blood and one by soul. The next morning, Talia entered the morgue in silence. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway as they always had. The cold walls, the smell of disinfectant, the gowns hanging up. Everything was the same, but something in her was no longer the same. She went to her locker, opened it slowly, took out the white gown with her name embroidered on the chest, and ran her hand over the loose threads on the sleeve, as if saying goodbye to an old friend. On the table was an envelope with her retirement application, signed and official. The hospital director called her into his office and said, "Are you sure, doctor?" She just nodded with a slight smile, very sure. "I've done what I had to do here." He tried to convince her, but she interrupted him gently. "My time among the dead is over. Now I want to take care of the living." And then she walked to the autopsy room for the last time, opened the door, went in, and looked around. For years, she had tried to understand death, to note its details, to discover its causes, to give a name to what no one else wanted to see. But it was also there that life decided to surprise her. It was there that Carlito sighed. She approached the empty stretcher where he had lain motionless between the edge of the end and the miracle. She ran her hand along the metal side, touching the exact spot where the scalpel had fallen from his hand, and said softly, "It was my last autopsy, and the only one that brought someone back to life." His voice was firm, but his eyes filled with tears. She took off her badge, placed it on the table, took a deep breath, and left the room without looking back. Outside, the sky was clear, and the sun was shining softly, but it was enough to warm her face. Talia walked to the sidewalk, took out her cell phone, and opened a photo of Carlito with the little sign that said, "My mom, from the heart, Dr. Talia." She smiled because she knew that in that place where so many had said goodbye, she had finally said yes to life. And now her time was different. It was time to live. And if it were you, and if instead of Talia, in that cold room with a scalpel in your hand and a nameless body on the stretcher, it was you, would you have stopped everything for a breath? Would you have run, faced threats, investigated the past of a stranger, embraced the pain of a mother who was not yours, and loved a child who did not come from your womb? Talia had that courage. She saved Carlito, but perhaps deep down, it was Carlito who saved her. Now tell me here in the comments what you would do in her place, or in Maria Rita's place. Would you have the strength to flee, to trust, to give your son to another woman? Write here in the comments the phrase, "Until the end, Talia," just to know who really made it to the last second of this story, who felt it, who lived through all this with us, and see if this story touched your heart. Comment, "God is faithful," and activate the bell, because every week there are real stories like this. Stories that make you cry, that make you think, that remind us of the value of life. And now, don't leave the video without clicking on what's appearing here on the side. It's one of the most exciting stories we've ever told. It has already made thousands of people cry and changed their way of seeing things. Click on it, take a deep breath, and get ready, because feeling is what still makes us human.